Hey guys, it's Nicole. Welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be discussing some of my favorite books from 2021 that were not fantasy. So I have already done a video on my fantasy favorites, which I will leave linked. I will also leave my most disappointing books of 2021 linked and my worst books that I read in 2021 linked. So if you want to hear my opinions on them, please check them out. I did rank all the books in my other end of year wrap up videos, but for this video they're not ranked. These are just books I really enjoyed that I really want to talk about, and quite a few of these are in genres I don't read a lot of. There's a couple of thrillers on here, which is very new for me. I was not really a thriller reader before 2021, but I really found some new faves that make me excited to explore the genre even more in future. The first book I want to talk about is Amari and the Night Brothers. I read this at the beginning of 2021 and I loved it. It is such a delightful middle grade series. We follow Amari, who ends up going to this, essentially it's a summer camp sort of thing, but it is very much a magical setup that we have, and she learns about her magical powers, and everyone else at the school or camp has magical powers, and it's just such a fun time. I'm a sucker for magical school settings, but I think particularly middle grade books that do the magical school settings have such a soft spot in my heart. I really loved Amari's character. I loved the friendships she formed. I really liked and appreciated how Amari overcame obstacles that she came across. I think there was a really great balance between her doing certain things on her own, but then also not being afraid of asking for help. Overall, I had just very nostalgic feelings towards this book. It is something I would have read growing up and loved so much that I would have reread a million times, and I adored this, and I'm really looking forward to the sequel that I think comes out in 2022. Hopefully. The next book I want to talk about is The Night Swim by Megan Golden, who I found out is actually an Australian author, which is exciting because I just lack in my Australian author reading. So we have my token Australian author on here. I really need to fix it. It's such a problem. But I really enjoyed this book and I highly recommend it. It is a book that is split up into two narratives. We have one narrative of this woman who is going to this small town to follow this rape case that is currently being fought at court. She has a podcast, and this is the third season of her podcast that she is filming, and she wants to follow this case live as the, what do you call it, proceedings at court unfold. But as she makes her way to the town, and while she's staying in this town, she starts getting these really quite creepy letters from someone who claims to have a sister who was killed, I think it's about 20 years ago, and she is desperate. This woman is desperate for this podcast lady to solve the mystery of what happened to her sister and to also reveal it and to bring justice to her sister. But it's done so creepily because the letters are left on the window of her car, or she goes for daily runs every morning and there's a letter left along her running route. They're so creepily done. And the second story we are following is actually the sister from 20 years ago, and so we see that case as well as the modern case unfold. I really enjoyed this. I found it really quite suspenseful. I liked how we had multiple things of suspense kind of happening. I really loved the audiobook as well because it is partly told like a podcast, just in those bits where it's needed, and I just loved the full cast. I think they all did a terrific job. So huge trigger warning because sexual assault and rape are a very large part of this book. It is discussed frequently, but there is also on page sexual assault and rape. Please proceed with caution if that is a trigger for you. The next book I wanted to mention is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. It's George telling their story from childhood to adulthood and how they sort of navigated their life and discovered their sexual identity and how that's changed and evolved over time, and the experiences that came with sort of that self-discovery. It also discusses trauma. I think this book is such an important book, and the audiobook is fantastic because George does narrate it themselves. I think it always adds so much more heart to a story when an author narrates their own book, so I definitely recommend consuming the story that way. I really don't have a whole lot to say on this. I never do when it comes to a lot of non-fiction, or especially like memoir non-fiction. I feel like there's not much to say. Like, it's not a book I read or go into like with a lot of critiques, like thinking I'm going to critique it, because I just want to sit there and listen to someone's story sort of thing. And I really enjoyed my time listening to this. I feel like I also learned a lot. I feel like there's a lot of conversations that I've never had. I really appreciated what George had to say, and I felt like I learned a lot from them, so I really recommend this. I think it's a great book. The next book I want to talk about that was a favorite of 2021 is another book that was very dark and hard and difficult to read, and also has a trigger warning for sexual assault and rape, and that is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. This story is really difficult to read. I highly recommend, if you do consider picking it up, to be mindful of when you do, because it is all about grooming. We follow our main character, I think her name was Enchanted, if I'm remembering correctly, and she has dreams and hopes of becoming a singer. She is restricted in being able to pursue a singing career because of her family situation. She comes from quite a large family and they're not very well off. Her parents are working multiple jobs to be able to provide for them, but she also has to spend a lot of time taking care of her younger siblings because she has quite a few younger siblings, so there's only so much time in the week that she can dedicate to her singing. But one day she sneaks away from school, doesn't tell her parents, and she goes to this competition, which is essentially like an American Idol sort of competition, and she sings there. She does really well, but she does not win anything. However, one of the judges was a very famous singer, and he takes a huge liking to Enchanted and ends up becoming a sort of mentor for her. Now, this is where the sort of inappropriate relationship starts. He is a lot older. I think he's like quite close to 30 and she's a teenager in high school, so it's inappropriate from the beginning, but also there is a huge power imbalance here because he's a famous singer with a lot of money, a lot of wealth, a lot of power. It's at times really difficult to read this, but I think what I loved about how Enchanted was written was she could have been any girl. There was no point in the story where I thought she was stupid or I didn't understand why she was doing what she was doing. I think it's so easy to be misled and to be persuaded and charmed by someone who's so much older, but also someone she had idolized. Like, this was someone famous that she had idolized and loved their stuff and had a career and life that she dreamed of having. You understood how easy it was for her to like go down this path. There is also a second narrative spread throughout this where it's hinted that something's happened, some sort of crimes happened that she's involved with. I don't want to say too much because I can't remember how much is revealed at the very beginning of the book, so something's gone wrong in the future and you get these tiny snippets, and this is where the book ends up leading and that kind of final reveal. I thought there was also some really excellent commentary on mental health here and how your mental health can be questioned and how you can be in a really shit and awful situation, but people sometimes will use your mental health against you to not believe you and to put doubt into what you're saying. It's a very heavy book, but I really think it was so well told, and I think it is also such an important story, but definitely a difficult one to read, so be mindful if you do plan to pick it up. But if you can handle those topics, I definitely recommend this story. The next book we need to discuss is The Silent Parade by Keigo Higashino. I did go back and forth quite a few times on which of his books I wanted to put on this list because I just freaking loved so many of his books and I read quite a few of them in 2021. Ultimately, it came down to either The Silent Parade being on this list or The Devotion of Suspect X, but I decided on The Silent Parade. I think I think that's my favorite, but Suspect X is definitely a close second. So either or, I mean, they're all good. They're all good. Now, this series of his, the Detective Galileo series, and unfortunately not all the books in the series are published in English. You can kind of read them out of order. I do sort of recommend reading them in order of what they're published in English, especially the Silent Parade I think is best to read last after the ones that are currently out. His mysteries are just so freaking clever, and I love the way he creates his backstories for the suspects and for the murder victims. They're so good, and they just make for the most interesting and compelling characters. I can't believe how invested I can get into characters. For a very long time I was not into thrillers, and a huge reason why I had a lack of interest in thriller books is because I never thought I could get invested into characters. But like Keiko Higashino proved that I was naive. I did not know any better, because oh my god, these are the best. Essentially we do have like a main detective and a main like sort of police force cast that we do follow, but they are so minor to the story. The stories in these books really do focus on the case and on the murder and on the mystery. Like that is the real focus. Like you really get to know all the people who are involved in the murder. The Silent Parade was really interesting because it was done quite differently to his previous books. It had multiple murders that sort of spanned throughout different decades and like multiple stories, and then it kind of all connects. It is so cool how it all ends up connecting. I'm gonna see how Goodreads describes it because I'm scared of saying something that could possibly spoil you. Like I just do not want to ruin it for you. Okay, so yeah, we have a popular young girl who's really well known in her town for being a really good singer and potentially having like an idol career when she grows up. And she disappears, and her remains are found 3 years after her disappearance. That is sort of the main case, but there's 2 other cases that are also part of this book. One was like an old woman's body being found in an abandoned house. They do have a suspect, but he doesn't talk. He refuses to say anything, and he gets away with lack of evidence. As much as I love this book, it is not the first book of his I would recommend. I do recommend starting off with either this Devotion of Suspect X or Salvation of the Saint. I think the mysteries in those books are much more simpler, and then you can kind of get more of a sense of how Keiko Higashino writes and his sort of storytelling. I think this book, The Silent Parade, is a little bit complicated and I wouldn't recommend jumping into it, but I just adore his mysteries. I think he's just such a genius. So clever, and please read them. Please read them. And the final book on this list, which I also think is my favorite out of these, I freaking adored this book, or this trilogy, and that is the Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. I just can't believe how much I loved this series. I was so shocked. I read the first book in a 24-hour readathon I did back in like September or October, and I really thought I was going to enjoy this series or this first book, but I did not think it was going to be an all-time favorite. This is an all-time favorite, and I'm so shocked. Like I literally cannot tell you how shocked I am, because this book is a young adult thriller, and my track record with YA thrillers honestly has been poor, has been absolute shite. I've never really found a favorite. Like there's been quite a few that I've had a fun time, but a favorite? No, they don't exist until this one. And I'm so shocked. This story starts off and we're following Pip, who has selected a case that happened in her small town a few years prior to the beginning of the book, where a boyfriend was accused of killing his girlfriend who disappeared and has still never been found, and then he committed suicide. Now Pip does not think this boyfriend did it, but she did know him and she knew the girlfriend, and she thinks that there was more to the case than what has been revealed to the public and what the public know. So she wants to do her school project on this case and also make a podcast out of it. Now, she starts off by just going around the town interviewing the friends of the boyfriend and girlfriend, and as she digs deeper and deeper, she finds out so much. I loved this. I really loved Pip as a character. I think she's relatable to a lot of teenage girls who really like overwork themselves to do really well at school and to overachieve. But I also really loved her friendship group and how we saw their development throughout the series. I just was so invested in these characters. I was just so invested in the mystery. It had me gagged so many times. I did not see where it was going. Like, I thought at points I knew what was happening, I knew what was unfolding. I was wrong. I was dead wrong. This book did that. This series did that the entire time. It was so intense and so suspenseful. This is one of those stories where it kept me up at night. Like, I could not stop listening to the audiobooks. I had to know what was going to happen next, and I read this at a time where I sort of stopped reading for a while. Sort of took a break from reading in the middle of the year, and this was one of the first series I picked up, and that's just like made me fall in love with reading all over again. This is one of those books, and I will never stop talking about the series. I will never stop recommending the series. I think it's so fantastic, and I do think that it kind of has a little bit of a not negative rep, but like because it is YA thriller, that it does have sort of lower expectations for most people. Most people, once upon a time being me included, but it is so good. I think it's just so clever. I think what I loved about it was it wasn't just one book that was really well thought out. I think the entire series was so well thought out and plotted, and the way the third book made the entire series come full circle, genius, just genius. There is nothing I love more than a final book in a series bringing the series like full circle from the beginning. I did not realize that we were going to get like that much from this series. I wish Holly Jackson, the author, had more books out, because I would have binge read the rest of them by now, but she does not, so I'm stuck here waiting. But I love this series. I know a lot of people have talked so highly about it and recommended it, and I think it deserves all the hype that it's been getting. And if you have not picked it up yet and you've been thinking about picking it up, please take this as your sign to go do so right now, because I cannot recommend it enough. It is just brilliant. It's so good. And on that note, that's all the books I really loved that were not fantasy books in 2021. Let me know what other books you would recommend, particularly thrillers. I'm so excited to read more thrillers in 2022. I feel like it's really going to be a genre I read a lot of this year. I'm really enjoying my time. I think I'm starting to really get to know my taste as well. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to do so. I hope you're enjoying whatever you're reading at the moment, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!